welcome everyone. Thank you for being with us. My name's Karen Kiefer, and I'm coming to you from my office at the Church in the 21st Century Center here on the campus of Boston College. The campus is buzzing because everyone has returned from spring break. So again, we continue to move forward into this spring semester with delight and actually enjoy our Lenten journey and look forward to celebrating Easter, which will be here before you know it. We have one of our favorite people with us today, our friend Dan Cellucci, who is the CEO of the Catholic Leadership Institute, is with us to have a conversation about our future Catholics and future generations and what that looks like. Dan has been with us so many times. Please find him on our website or in our podcast or a previous video. He writes for our magazine. And not only is he a dear friend, but he is wisdom. And he has been with the Catholic Leadership Institute for decades. I'm dating you, Dan, but he can explain that. But I thought we'd just begin the conversation where, Dan, you might outline what is the Catholic Leadership Institute for a minute, and then let's just dive in.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this is one of my favorite places to be. So thank you, Karen, and to the team at Boston College, but also to all of you for hopefully, again, a lovely day where you are and taking time to be on a Zoom with me. So I'm looking forward to the conversation and really looking forward to your questions. But yeah, I have just celebrated 20 years at Catholic Leadership Institute. And we are a nonprofit that works all around the country and in Canada to provide leadership formation support to all of our leaders in the church. We work at the diocesan level, we work at the parish level, we work with our priests and lay leaders in ongoing formation. And then we also have kind of that institute part of our name, a growing thought leadership kind of arm to what we do. So as we kind of go around to the country and visit different dioceses and different contexts in ministry, try to kind of distill all that we're learning and seeing and share that as best as we can with the church. So our conversation today is the fruit of about 2 years of ongoing dialogue with I would make one correction to what Karen said, with our today Catholics who are going to be leaders and continue to be leaders into the future. But these conversations with millennials and Gen Z that we've been about in a real intentional way for the last 2 years.
Dan, a good reminder that we want to invite everyone into this conversation today. So we do encourage you, if you have questions, to put them in the chat. And our colleague Andrew Craig will go through them. And this conversation is for you, and so that you can engage and get as much out of it as possible for the work that you do in moving forward. So welcome again, Dan. So appreciative of your work. Let's first talk about those millennials, and says the baby boomer, and let's also talk about Gen Z. And can you explain what it is? What's a millennial? What's a Gen Zer? And even the age groups and some of the characteristics and just the crossovers too.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, again, it's important that we kind of really start out, and the way Paper does this, by just defining as best as we can with any type of generation of people or category of people, kind of who they are and where they come from. So when we're talking about the millennial generation, I am kind of the first year, if you will. I'm 44 years old. So if you can kind of keep that in mind, millennials are really 1996 to 1981. They are now in their 30s and 40s, really, the bulk of them. So sometimes I was saying to the BC staff, sometimes in church conversations, we talk about the millennials and we think about them as kids in college or high school students. They're actually now, in really significant moments of life where they're making all sorts of life decisions. Are they gonna, what's their vocation gonna be? What professional career are they doing? Where are they gonna put down roots, if they're gonna put down roots? So we have this generation that's kind of 30s to 40s. That's the millennials. And you have to kind of keep in mind the things that they may, or that I may have grown up with, as opposed to, for example, Gen Z. Gen Z is my children's age, or some of my children's age. They would be born between 1997 and 2012. So some of them would still be in high school. and in college, but some of them are now kind of making their way out into the workforce. One of the things I think is important in this conversation as it relates to your important ministry is trying to distinguish between things that are phase of life differences versus things that might be generational differences. And what do I mean by that? I think sometimes we say, and I was in a conversation just the other week, and a bishop said to me, well, when they're 60, they'll know what it's like. And it's like, well, in certain cases, yes, right? We might have similar phase of life issues when you are having your first child or you're experiencing your body aging, right? That might be a phase of life type of situation. A generational difference, though, is really the context, environment, the things that shaped your upbringing, your understanding, your worldview. So 9/11 happened when I was in college. I didn't have a cell phone in college, okay? But my kids don't know a world with a landline. So when we think about that, we have to think about those things. That's very real relative to how we understand the world. My oldest, who is going to college next year, I asked her to write a thank you letter to somebody who wrote a very nice recommendation to try to get her into Boston College. And she didn't know that she had to put a stamp on the letter because she doesn't send letters. I mean, so these are things that we just have to understand. She's probably not going to get into Boston College based on that fact that I just gave you, but nonetheless. So when we talk about some of the generational distinctions that we would make, I think you see in the millennial generation a desire for real relationship. They understand that the relationships that they might have had growing up have kind of not really panned out because they've been digital or fabricated. So they're really searching for relationship, for connection, for community. They have this kind of comfort with ambiguity and comfort with things that can be figured out because they like to figure it out together. Whereas Gen Z is looking for a little bit more structure, a little bit more things that they want to do. But even the difference between these two generations, again, even from a technology standpoint, is very different. So just some things to keep in mind as you think about who these folks are and where they are and what has shaped them growing up.
I think it's fair to say that we can't deny that technology is part of all of this. You know, they describe the millennials as the first digital natives, the internet age, and then the Generation Z, digital native smartphones from the birth, as you said. So there's that comfort, but everyone's a part of that.
Yeah, and there's another. Definitely read the white paper. But if you haven't read the book, The Anxious Generation, I really, really, really encourage it for anybody in ministry. I've just finished it, and it really tracks with some of the things that you hear or read in the white paper. But the author talks about, we just talk about technology sometimes as this thing, but the technology, influence affects the way that we played growing up, affects the way that we learned how to communicate or make friendships and relationships. So just even, again, the difference between these two generations, millennial versus Gen Z, and their ability to initiate relationship building is different because of the way and the effect of technology. So just another resource, The Anxious Generation, I'd highly recommend it if you're in ministry.
Now, maybe we can add that to the link too. Add that to the chat. So Dan, let's get into the study. And I'm curious, you dedicated so much time and effort into this important study. So why and how did you do it? When did you do it? And I'm so curious about the fruits.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, I think I've been on, as Karen mentioned earlier, I've been on kind of this webinar a bunch of times talking about some of our research on parish life. And that's come from one of the largest parish surveys in the world, our Disciple Maker Index. But one of the things probably going about 3 years ago, certainly that we were aware of, but we were like, gosh, 6-7 years into this study on parish life, the most, of course, underrepresented sample in the survey were these generations the under 35 crowd at that time. So we just said, in order to make sure we're really understanding who we're called to serve, we have to go out and be even more intentional. So the conversation, and I use that term because that's really what we've wanted it to be, has taken a couple different forms over the last 2.5 years. We have hosted roundtable conversations, synodal types of conversations in several different cities, eight different cities around the country now, that we're continuing to host, by the way. So this is an ongoing dialogue that now you're a part of. But where we've really invited these generations in and been very, very intentional to make sure we're not just getting the people who are already in a parish, but people who are out of a parish. So we've had really interesting dialogues between what I like to say, those who have 2 feet out and 2 feet in, and them talking to each other and listening to each other. That's been one part of it, these different regional sit downs. We've also had 3 virtual symposium conversations like this, where we get experts in ministry, people who are doing campus ministry, for example, or adult faith formation or family life, as well as, again, members of these different generations. And we've sat down with them virtually and talked about reaching, engaging, and inspiring these generations. And you can see that structure in the white paper. And then we've also had, I was telling Karen before we joined on, we do an annual session for bishops. And we used the theme of this to be one of those sessions. And we actually had about 20 different millennials, even further segmented. So late millennials, late Gen Z, early Gen Z, come on to a Zoom and actually tell the bishops kind of where they are. And all of those folks were folks who are distant from the church, so that the bishops could really just hear them and hear what they had to say, and let them kind of speak into it. So all these conversations, in addition to the quantitative research, has kind of informed that. I think some of the early fruits for me, just even raising awareness to the segmentation, I think for the bishops as an example, or for some diocesan leaders where we've shared this, or priests in parish ministry where we've been able to share it, that there's really very distinct differences between these generations. And sometimes we lump young people all in at the same time. And we really shouldn't do that for any generation. I mean, we really should look at different segments in our parish communities for all generations and think about where they are, what's shaped them, what their pain points are, how the church can kind of feed that yearning and develop a really thoughtful strategy for each. This is the first time in our history that the church, that you and your parishes are serving 8 living generations at the same time.
Yeah.
Because people are living longer, right? So think about that burden, because I don't have to tell you about it. You know it from your ministry. That's a lot to try to hold, right? But yet it's necessary. So I think even just the segmentation has been helpful. The other thing that I would just bring up to you that I think was one of the most interesting for me, both the segment of these generations who said they had 2 feet in, right? They were practicing, they were doing Bible studies, they were very involved. They were going to mass every day, if not, certainly every week, versus those who had very little kind of affiliation or involvement in the church. They both said the same thing. We would never register in your average parish. And it was like, why? And it was for those who were disaffiliated, you could imagine, why. But for those who were very involved, it was like, there's nothing there for me. I don't have a place there. I feel actually kind of marginalized when I show up, because, and they mentioned these, one young lady said, I show up and inevitably somebody older comes up and kind of affirms me for being there, but then kind of slams my generation that I'm the only one there. It's like, that's her experience of going to church. It's like, thank you for being here. Where's the rest of you? And it's like, whoa, so they felt isolated, and therefore they are making community in other ways. They are forming their own faith sharing groups. They're choosing to move into similar neighborhoods where the parish is more friendly. So we have to keep in mind that these generations, millennial especially, are much more mobile. They are moving their location every 5 to 6 years. So in some cases for them, and again, that's not like, one day they'll settle down. That's because just professional life can be a lot more mobile now. People are used to doing that. So in some ways, our parishes, I would offer, have to think about almost kind of a rhythm like a Newman Center.
Yeah.
Like in a Newman Center, right, at BC, you're losing 25% of your population because they're moving on, right? It's not because they don't like you. It's just they're moving somewhere. And so you have to kind of work every year to replace that 25% and not take anything for granted. And I think in some ways, parish life is kind of mirroring that with the mobility of these generations.
Yeah, I mean, gone are the days where we would grow up in our parish and just stay there until we went off to college, and then we'd come back and would still maybe get married in the parish, and you'd know the pastor forever.
Right.
And it's super challenging for these parishes and for the pastors and for all the staff and the catechists and everything that goes into understanding who are your people and then where are the other people, and like you said, making them feel welcome
Right.
to come in. It's quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge. And
Yeah, and then there's even, Karen, there's very particular like ramifications, right? Like I don't carry cash. Okay. Like if I don't carry cash. So when I go into a visiting parish, like because I'm traveling, my kids have both of my older girls, for example, are very, athletic. And so, they play on travel teams. Now, we as a family make a priority to go to mass, but it's not always our parish church. But guess what? Like if that parish doesn't have a way for me to do Venmo or some other type of giving, they're not getting any money from me that Sunday. And it's not because I don't want to support them. It's like I literally don't carry cash. Now, you could say, Dan, stop by an ATM and do that. And that might be a fair encouragement. But I think, we just have to kind of realize certain implications that our current maybe parish system is based upon. Those assumptions are shifting.
so when you were having conversations with the bishops and kind of sharing this knowledge and also their voices of Gen Z and millennials, what were some of their thoughts and
Yeah.
reactions?
Well,
Curious.
let me share two instances which I thought were really, we really worked to create a space where the bishops can have some really honest conversations with each other, and it's a beautiful space, and they enter into it in a really wonderful way. But just two anecdotes that I would share on that point. One was in the way that we facilitated these Zoom panels, because we're asking disaffiliated Catholics to be on a Zoom
Right.
with 40 bishops in front of them and to speak their truth, right? That's what we said. I didn't put any parameters on what they could say, what they couldn't say. But in order to facilitate that, I gave them some questions to think about. Why are they distant? How did that happen? All that type of stuff. And then I said the bishops are not going to respond. They're just going to listen so that they can really hear you.
Mm-hmm.
And then and on the part of the bishops, I asked them to think about the questions they had, and then I kind of funneled those to participants. Anyway, at the end of one of the Zoom panels, one of the millennials just said, I just kind of gave them open floor, any closing remarks. And one of them said, like, I have never felt heard by the church before. And he said, so the fact that all of you are sitting there, like listening to me, he said, makes me think I should check this out again.
Oh.
And so we finished the Zoom, and the bishops literally said to me, like, we didn't do anything. Like, we literally sat here, and I said, yeah, isn't that interesting? Like, you could sit and listen to somebody, and that actually could just be the first step, right? Like that young man, who, by the way, not that young, he's late 30s, has his first child, making a critical decision. Am I going to get this child baptized or not? All he needed, at least as a first step, was to be heard, right? So that's just one instance. Yeah. The second one was there was another Gen Z who talked about a positive experience they had where they were invited to go to adoration. They didn't know what adoration was, but a friend asked them to go and said that it was good space to think. That's how the invitation went. And that the Gen Z talked about the fact that they had lights on the monstrance. They had kind of very beautiful music being played, and that really helped him, right? So that was all he said. One curmudgeon-y bishop said, well, here they go again, wanting to be entertained. And interestingly, another brother bishop said, you know what? Like, CLI invites us to this session. Many of us come every year because they treat us well. Everything is well thought out and intentional. Like, maybe the kid is just looking for something to be done well. Like, maybe it's not about being entertained. Maybe it's just because he doesn't want to waste his time with things that he doesn't understand that aren't done well, So I think there was this other interesting learning, at least that came out from it, which is these generations don't buy into institutions, any institutions, government, church, whatever. they don't care about keeping something going. Like that doesn't mean anything to them. So they see kind of mediocrity or things being poorly done as a reflection that actually it's a lack of care or desire on the part of those who lead, that they don't care. Why would I care about this? I'm not going to waste my time with that. Now, again, we can talk about the divine all day, but with where they are, at least the disaffiliated ones, if they don't see us putting our best foot forward by way of intentionality, they pick up on that as inauthenticity. And I think that was an important lesson too.
Oh, definitely. You know, at the Church in the 21st Century Center, we've been really intentional and doing a lot of work with high school students, both nationally and internationally through our programs, and also obviously college students. And we've talked about this before. We started this Student Voices Project where we were asking students back in 2019 here on campus, just on campus, like, tell us about your faith life. Tell us about your relationship with God. Tell us about your relationship with the church. And we kind of started that and then continued it and moved it through the pandemic. And then finally we were doing surveys and we were engaging them and doing incentives to fill out surveys. But we were just getting some fascinating information. During that time, the synod and the synodical process was going on. And I've said this to you before, Dan, where we were noticing that a lot of the high school students, if they weren't making their confirmation or they really weren't present in the parish, and they weren't necessarily, I don't want to make a gross generalization, but they weren't going with their family to mass. And if they were in Catholic school, they were really finding their parish, so to speak, or their relational experience with God in the high school and then also in the college.
Yes.
And it was such a revelation because we realized during our Student Voices project, and again, the link will be in the chat, that it's so important for high schools, Catholic high schools, and even parish high schools, to have that relationship not only with the parish, but also with colleges, and kind of just invite everyone in, that it's all part of something bigger. And then another thing we realized with the high school students is how incredibly curious they were about the sacraments. And you're seeing that in your survey too. And also, especially the sacrament of confession, that was a big one.
Yes.
And then how they're so curious about being invited into the liturgy and that invitation and what that looks like. And most high school kids do not remember the sexual abuse crisis. That does not factor in at all to their faith practice.
Yeah, or they've unfortunately experienced or heard about sexual abuse in like USA Gymnastics or Penn State football or whatever. Because it's an epidemic, across our society that has to be addressed and attended to. So they have unfortunately grown up with kind of this awareness that this is kind of an evil that is out there and real, and we have to be attentive to. So it does not. You're right. It doesn't come up in our research like they did. I'll be honest, it didn't come up once really in a lot of the other than I would say that the distrust of institutions. I think that's how it kind of manifests. But they know that there's bad people out there doing bad things, and that's not it. But I think to your point, Karen, the curiosity is something that I also think we really have to lean into. I remember facilitating the synod here in Philadelphia, and we did a synodal session for college age students, so this generation, and in one of the remarks that just haunts me in a good way was, she's like, I want this young lady said, I want the church to answer the questions we're asking. Like, you're not answering the questions that we are asking. Like, so stop answering questions we're not asking and answer the questions we're asking. And I think about that in a couple different ways. Millennials are, according to kind of Pew and other third-party data, they're some of the most ethnically diverse, like one of the most ethnically diverse generations, right? Because their parents maybe met from different cultures, and so they've kind of grown up in a world that is very fluid for them. It's not so defined in many cases. There's certainly exceptions to that, but I think generally as a generation, they are more ethnically diverse. They also have grown up again in situations that have shaped them. So, my one daughter's best friend, for example, who's now, again, 18 years old. She is a product of in vitro fertilization. She's never had a dad, and her mom had her through in vitro. Now, the church the church can speak about that and should speak about that, but the reality is that this young woman is here, and she's my daughter's friend. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, it's not a question of right, wrong. It's a question of how do we understand this now? Do you see what I mean? Like, and the church has a responsibility to help us live and kind of be faithful in the context in which we live. So we have to answer the questions at the level that people are asking them, or we minimally, I think and this is what we heard in the research, we have to create spaces in our parish communities where we can at least have conversation and not become instantly uncomfortable or, shut things down because we don't know the answers or we don't want to go there. Or it's like, these generations are there. They're not, they can't, it's not like we can insulate them, again, given the mobility, given the technology. We're there. So we have to kind of deal in the real, as one of my friends say, like, and kind of really like exchange in that context. That was another thing I think that came up.
I think, obviously hospitality is big, but let's dive into community and how they define community and what that might look like. And then as you journeyed not only through this survey, but also in the last couple, 2 decades that you've been working at the Catholic Leadership Institute, good ideas in creating community that you can share with the people who are with us today? I know we can, but I would really be open.
Yeah, I think with respect to community, I think both kind of on what we learned and connected to kind of good ideas. I think space is very important. Space came up more than I thought it would, in the sense that these generations in particular are looking for places to be together. So both space and schedule came up frequently. Here's a for instance. There was a young lady in Covington, Kentucky, was looking to start a Bible study with friends and wanted to host it at the parish, right? Well, that needed to take place at 8:00 at night. Okay, and so the very practical issue that happened was the parish is like, we're not open at that time. We don't want to give you a key. Like real stuff, right? I'm not, but the reality was then she felt dismissed, and then she took her friends and had to go somewhere else, right? So these generations in particular, the space, the physical space, but also the schedule becomes really important. And I think, again, it's hard to kind of get out of old rhythms, or existing rhythms, but we have to kind of represent, if we're thinking about those 8 generations, how much of our schedule and our practices kind of geared toward a certain generation that is maybe our generation or easiest for us to minister to, right? So with respect to building community, schedule and space were really important. Where can we meet? And how can that be connected or supported by the church? And when can we meet? The other thing I would say is, I don't think these generations mind intergenerational conversations, but they often described feeling, as I said earlier, like they're on an island. So they might be the only 40-year-old in the room, or the only 30-year-old in the room, or the only 20-year-old in the room. And it was hard for them to feel like they could relate, or other people could relate to them, or they weren't getting lectured or whatever. And so the idea of maybe sometimes partnering with other parishes or trying to have groups of where you could have intergenerational conversations, but recognizing, again, phase of life and generation both matter when you're doing things like small groups or other things you're trying to run, that these folks are going to have a particular perspective, and they want to bring that, but they don't want to be the only person bringing that. That feels kind of overwhelming. So I think those were kind of things that also kind of came into play. They love brunch, at least in many of the conversations, like brunch is a thing. So I think trying to figure out like what would they be doing if they're not going to the parish? Well, they would be going to have brunch with their friends. So how can the parish kind of play into that? And maybe it doesn't mean the parish is hosting brunch. Maybe the parish is sponsoring brunch at a really cool breakfast place, right? Like we we don't always have to take on the thing, but maybe we can be a part of the thing. I remember just one other story on the community piece. I'm here in southeastern Pennsylvania, Chester County, kind of a more burgeoning suburban area, but tons of young families. My wife is a runner, and so they have this thing here called the Healthy Kids Running Series. So basically, all these super type A runners, adult runners, can start forcing their children to run through these little races that they have for kids of all ages. So my wife and I brought our kids to the Healthy Running Series. I swear every young family in Chester County was there, and they had different booths set up, different organizations, gyms, etc. There was a Protestant church that had a booth that was giving out soft pretzels, which in Philadelphia might as well be gold when they're the right soft pretzels. And my kids were like, I want a soft pretzel. So I went up and I was like, hey, we're Catholic. Like, can I taste your soft pretzel? You know, and they were like, sure, go for it. And they had games for the kids. But I talked to these two women who were staffing the booth, and I asked them something about their church, new Protestant church. And I said, so do you work for the church? They were both full-time youth and young adult volunteers. So they volunteer 40 hours a week for this church. And I said, oh, and she said, I said, it's so nice that you're here. And she said, this is where our people are. Where else would we be? Mm-hmm. And I thought about my parish, and I have a wonderful parish. Ain't nobody from my parish going to sit at a booth all day long, including me, to just wait and hope somebody comes. But that's where the people are. Mm-hmm. That's where 95% of the souls that we're responsible are, right? So that outward focus, that's where these generations are. And how do we kind of be in their space, not necessarily make them come to our space, but how do we be in their space and be present in their space with them?
Which goes back to what you were just talking about how space is important.
Yes.
But not only the space that they meet in and that they find community in, but the space for the church to find them in.
Yes.
And being forward thinking like that and creative, frankly, you know, I think that's great.
Yeah.
You know, they can teach us a lot. I want to get into some of the questions that are in the chat. Andrew, I don't know if you want to, read a question. And again, we invite you into this conversation. You're all doing the work of sharing God's love. And these are challenging times, but there's so much hope out there, Dan. And we see it on our college campuses. We see it, we see it all over. Like you said, there's that curiosity. And I think this is a very special moment for the church.
Yeah, so looking at the chat now, just a couple mainly comments, but great additions to the conversation. So Bill added a couple notes, Dan, to your point about the anxious generation. He just added phenomenally well-researched, excellent presentation on the effects of technology on the young brain. Great for anyone, parents especially in ministry. And he added too that the author also co-wrote a children's vision called The Amazing Generation. So I thought that was a great note.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was a great overview presentation. I'm curious to know, was there any sense of kind of either the theological bent, if there is one? I mean, I'm sure there is one, particularly as we look at this newer generation of more conservative priests who have been ordained in their generations, right? Either that they embrace, or at least some indications of where they're at in that regard, or whether that they react to. Are they reacting to more progressive or more conservative? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say the interesting thing is that in both cases, it was more around how the priest related and less around his ecclesiology. So for example, somebody who a millennial, we might look at and say, gosh, the way they talk is very progressively minded, or whatever language you want to use. They actually had connections to very conservative priests, but the priest was able to hang. You know what I mean? Like he was a normal guy, if you will, who had some very defined points of view, maybe on particular church issues or approach to liturgy, but he was relational. So I think that was one thing we heard. I think you definitely do see, and I think particularly around young men in these generations, a desire for for structure and challenge. And I think some are definitely kind of drawn to things like the Latin Mass or a more kind of traditional approach because they see that as structured and kind of challenging. Exodus 90 as an example, another kind of program around, asceticism or that type of stuff. So I think, but interestingly enough, I think that's actually larger than just in the church. I think that's actually happening in society relative to, especially again, with respect to young men, kind of looking for some semblance of like, what is real and true and what am I about here? And actually, that's an even bigger difference between millennials and Gen Z. You saw millennials, I would say, Daniel, in the more, let's say, progressive space in our conversations, whereas Gen Z was much more in a like, I want to know what's right and wrong. Like, just tell me what's right. Tell me what the answer is. And I'm sure there's a million and one reasons, but we even saw a difference between the generations on that in the conversations we had. So,
another question in the chat. This comes from Quasi, who I think is our Quasi friend. So thank you, Quasi. He says, you alluded a little bit to it when it comes to ethnic groups and connectedness or isolation. Did you see any differences in terms of family background, i.e. African, Latino, Vietnamese, Chinese, or is that for the next project?
Yeah, great. It's an ongoing project. We actually got a grant from the Porticus Foundation to look at different communities, cultural communities in our parishes, which we have another paper on. What I would say is what we found in this case is actually related not so much to specific communities, but actually more so to the generation of, and by that I mean the immigrant generation of the person. So I would say first generation Latinos in this country, for example, would be much more representative of maybe what we might consider kind of older generations here relative to practice and understanding of the faith. But second generation Latinos are following more, I would say, kind of these generations more largely in our society, because again, they have integrated, right? They're speaking English. They have dated with, other cultures. Their friends are intermarrying in different cultures. So it's just kind of lessons or I say kind of maybe dissipates the effect of the culture of origin. Although there are certain pieces that I would point out. For example, in the Latino culture, I think there was a much more hunger for what I would call kind of a more paternal role of priests in preaching, and just kind of a comfort and familiarity with that, for example, whereas for other millennials, not so much. So I think there's definitely some other cultural realities, but I think it more depends on the generation of kind of immigration that you're talking about in all these cases.
Dan, so we are a sacramental people, and I'm curious what you found regarding the sacraments leading more young people back to the church. Did you catch that?
I might have froze for a little bit. You said sacraments leading people back to
the church. Yeah, because we're finding that with a lot of our young people here on campus and also through our programs that they're very interested in the sacraments.
Yeah, and I think I can't take credit for this research, but I think it was Barna who did a study especially on millennials, that said that millennials are looking for three things. They're looking for authenticity.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They're looking for real relationship,
mm-hmm.
and they're looking for impact. And so I think the church has all three of those things. But I think the sacraments in some ways kind of speak to truth, right? In different ways. They certainly are about real presence, right? In so many different levels of that. And I think this idea around vocation is the church's answer to impact, right? So what we heard from from millennials is like a curiosity around bishops and priests, or like religious, like why would you choose this life? But not in a dismissive way, like in a, gosh, that must mean something to you. Like, tell me more about what this means to you because it's real, So I think that's where I see the sacraments. It's like this, back to this kind of idea of like a challenge or something that's real or structured in a world that feels very kind of torn apart, or a world that feels very hard to kind of access it or kind of get your bearing on, I think that's where the sacraments can really help. Or just even silence, like time in silence when they have so much noise in their lives, I think is another piece.
I think too, I mentioned earlier about how there's a great thirst for the sacrament of confession.
Yes.
For our young people. And in our conversations, they said that they carry around a lot of shame.
A lot of shame.
And that could even be a bad post on social media, but they carry it. It stays with them. And that there's such beauty to that sacrament that they're finding that they feel clean.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is just so key.
One of the points the anxious generation author makes is every mistake these kids make is amplified 50 times more than when mistakes any of us who grew up before social media made, right? So yeah, Karen, I think that's a big part of it. Like there's the accountability, there's the forgiveness, there's the healing. There's a sense of understanding their worth in that sacrament, if it's administered in a pastoral way. So I think that's huge.
We were through our Student Voices project, when we were engaging with Catholic schools, high schools in particular, we were saying, please, if you don't have weekly confession, think about it. Think about daily confession. I mean, these kids, they really want that.
Yeah, and at a time that's not Saturday from 3 to 3:45.
Exactly. Exactly. Again, time and space,
Time and space.
So we have a lot of great questions in the chat. Dan, I'm not sure if you're seeing the chat, if there's any.
I am, yeah.
We got like 5 or 6 great ones. I don't know if there's any that you want to tackle first.
Yeah, let me see here. Let's jump in. I find Gen Z very ahistorical. Is this a problem? If Peter wouldn't mind, just tell me a little bit more about that, the ahistorical one. All right, we'll come back. I want to make sure I understand that question. The climate crisis affecting young adult relationship with the church. How do you see Laudato Si as a way of engaging young Catholics? Yeah, this came up on that Zoom panel that I was talking about with the bishops. There was a young lady who the only thing she said, this was her quote, the only thing keeping her connected to the Catholic Church, which is the church of her birth and baptism as a baby, was that Pope Francis wrote this letter on the environment. That was like it. So I think this is a really good example. The climate crisis is not the only issue, but this is an issue that millennials and Gen Z know is an issue, right? And know will be our issue to deal with in a more substantive way. So this is one of those places, I think, where the church speaking into that and being a voice and a leader in it is a way to show the beauty of the truth and the depth of the truth that exists in our Catholic teaching. Margaret Mary says, could you comment on how to expand the conversation of being pro-life as only anti-abortion to issues to the death penalty, poverty, and injustice that lead to abortions and family dysfunction? Yeah, again, I think this is another one where I think, again, I'm not going to speak for the very, very, very Latin Mass kind of crowd, because I think you're making somewhat of an insinuation, which I don't think is incorrect, that the abortion issue is one. I like to invite people to think about especially when they self-proclaim themselves to be Orthodox. They use that term Orthodox. I like to draw a distinction that orthodoxy means the fullness of truth. Like if you are Orthodox, you believe the whole thing. So tell me how you believe the whole thing, right? And have conversations about the whole thing, And so this is what I love to do with my daughter, who would be maybe in a different world on her views right now. But I'm like, tell me how you see the whole thing, because the church is above politics. That's what I always say. The church is too big for politics, too important for politics. So we're bigger than that. We have to see the whole thing. So I think inviting, not kind of trying to make it a this or a that, but like an and. Let's look at and, right? This is true. And I think trying to create spaces for that, where we're not actually debating, we're adding, I think is maybe the place to start on that. That's a big one though. You alluded.
Sorry to interrupt. Peter responded. He said, yes, ahistorical in his experience, as in Gen Z has little understanding of larger contexts that have been and are influential in life decisions.
Sure. Yes. That's a really good point. I think we have to be careful of two things in kind of that question, right? Part of the process of growing up is actually testing things and realizing what works and what doesn't work, right? I can tell my children so many things, but until they actually have that experience, I don't think they can really learn it. And so I've had to kind of humble myself and restrain myself as a parent to say, I know that I had this experience, right? So that's one aspect, is I do think that's a phase of life issue, that sometimes there's an experiential learning that has to happen in order for maturity to happen. Now, I would pick an issue. This is one that came up. Again, even with Catholic millennials and Gen Z who had 2 feet in, many of them said, I don't care if my parish stays or goes. Now, you could answer, some of us could answer from an older, and say, well, listen, like having a stable community that you're rooted in helps you in this type of thing, right? But I think we also have to realize the overall landscape that we're back into, and some have called it kind of this shift from Christendom to apostolic times, right? And Jesus didn't. If we buy that we're back in apostolic times, and I do, Jesus didn't found the diocese, or I should say, after Jesus ascended, they didn't found the Diocese of Jerusalem. Like, they went out and they created some communities, right? So in some cases, the earlier anecdote that I gave around the young lady having to go and create a community that was meeting and praying together and in an apartment somewhere is actually kind of emblematic of the phase that we're back into, this shift that the church has been in, where we have structures and stability and predictability, and then we have chaos and things happening that we have to kind of find our roots in, right? So it may be that we have to let them learn it before they can really appreciate it. And it may be that it's actually not what the church needs anymore. Actually, what the church needs in this moment is going to be different because it's back into this landscape, right? So I think when we're imparting history, I think we have to be careful not to be lecturing. I think we have to be careful. I think we have to be witnessing. So what has a parish community done for me? Not what do I think you have to appreciate about a parish community. And I think that's maybe the right way. All right, Andrew, any others that you think are?
Yeah, I think just going down the list, I think you answered Margaret's about death penalty and everything. Martha asks, this is sort of a two-parter. You alluded to this a little bit with Gen Z men seeking more structure and challenge. One, what are the biggest differences you found between the needs of young men and young women? And two, did you gather any data on trans or non-binary young people and their hopes/needs from parishes?
Yeah, I would say maybe to the second point, I would not say that there was a large representation of trans or non-binary people in the conversations. That being said, what I would say just from personal experience in my own family, there's a seeking or a desire for knowledge of identity in what I heard or what I hear from my own family situation. And what I think the church sometimes does is we want people to check a bunch of boxes to belong versus telling them that they are a pearl of great price, that the merchant, would sell everything and just come after you. That's what Jesus is doing for every person, right? Including and especially our trans and binary folks. So that they are a pearl of great price. And that's actually the message that all these generations, and I would say young men and young women, are searching for. They want to know that they matter. They want to know that they are not alone. They want to know that their life has meaning. And they are not finding that in other avenues, and they're realizing that. I think the difference, I would say there's a slight difference between men and women on this question around kind of challenge and structure. I think that I would say yielded much more toward the men that we talked to and talked with than the women. I think the women, I would say, emphasize much more on the community and relationship aspect and fine. Yeah, both genders, though, I would also talk about, it's in the white paper, life transitions. I'm moving to a new city, I'm getting married, or I'm having my first child. In both cases, both genders, that was a place where they felt like the church could be more present. Like, help me connect when I move to a new city, right? There's a diocese or a parish everywhere, right? Like, so how do I connect? How do I find people? Like, how do I find my people? That was kind of both genders.
Thank you, Dan. There's a few more in. I'll just go in order. Joe asks us, at least in his experience, he's found a small number of young Catholics who are involved in the peace movement today. So he's asking if there's any research on why that is. And then the next one, I'll just say both, is how would you describe the influence of social media, videos, etc., as opposed to or in addition to personal connection, like with priests and peers?
Yeah, I don't know that I can speak much to the peace movement. I think the reality is that these generations are, some might say practical. They might call themselves practical. Other might be kind of self-obsessed a little bit. So I think the reality of societal issues, like climate as an example, they care about climate, but they also know climate's going to affect them, right? So I think in many cases with most social issues, it's not purely altruistic, although there's certainly altruistic notes in there. I think it does have to be like a very real, like, crap, like, what are we going to do about this? Like, I have another 40 years to live. So I think you see a wanting to get their hands on things sooner rather than later, and oftentimes feeling kind of at a distance. So I think movements that allow them to step up sooner, I think, are often attractive. That's one point I would make. The second point was around, Andrew, just remind me, it was around
social media and videos.
Social media, yeah.
How would you describe the influence of them as opposed to or in addition to in-person personal connections?
Yes. So again, this several authors. There's another video that and maybe Andrew, if you can even Google it right now. Simon Sinek has an awesome video called "The Millennial Question." And he speaks to this very directly in a way that I think is very, very compelling. When you're in adolescence, teenage year, high school, college, okay, that is a really brutal separating from your family unit, but it's a really important part of growing up. So like my daughter has to go into some other phase, so she gets out of my house and figures out who she is. And at that time, you're making friends and you're figuring out who your real friends are, right? Who your real friends are. Right now, I would tell you, my two older girls who are on social media, albeit in a limited way, one of the ways they evaluate who their friends are how quickly they like a post they make. Okay. And if they don't get a like from a friend, that becomes a source of anxiety. Think about that. I'm putting something out there to millions of people, and the number of times that somebody likes it and who likes it and why they like it or don't like it, right? I'm constantly riddled with anxiety about trying to figure out who my friends are in this environment. In the old days, the better days, I would say, when I'm on a playground and there's three of us and we're having an issue, right? I'm working through that in a more healthy way than I think social media has allowed these children to work through. So the anxious generation guys, like, it's basically like, and Simon Sinek says the same thing. It's addictive, right? So it's addictive and it ruins your ability to assess real relationship. So no wonder they're so hungry for it when they're looking for a Catholic community, right? Because they have something that's the antithesis of it in many of the ways they've grown up. So we have to kind of walk this, although at the same time, I would say they were like, look, the church, have to be on it because we're there. That's how we're literally communicating. We're not even texting anymore. Like, this is the way we reach each other. So you have to kind of, we almost have, as a church, have to reach into it and pull them out. It's like pull them back to something real, which I think is a challenge to navigate.
I will say too that our next magazine that's coming out the end of the summer, it really addresses finding and growing a relational faith in a digital age, what that looks like for all of us. Dan, before we're winding down, but I do want to point people to the white paper, and then also especially your recommendations, which are on page 11 through 14.
Yep.
And you talk about how to reach the next generation, how to engage the next generation, how to inspire the next generation. And we might just do a couple of quick points of each. For reaching the next generation, you're talking about, again, you mentioned this about space and time and thinking about working professionals and thinking about young people and their lifestyle. You also mentioned the importance of hospitality and greeters and having a good website where the masses are right there, and other thoughts on reaching, and then we can get to engaging and inspiring.
Yeah, I think the reach is really about time and space. I mean, I think when we're doing things, where we're doing things, and being really intentional about that, I think is really huge.
Mm-hmm. And then for engaging.
Yeah, engaging. This one's harder. On the engaging side, I would say I always tell the story when in my last parish, I went to the ministry fair and looking around the booths, and somebody came up to me and was like, "How old are you?" And I was like, "Hi, my name's Dan. Like, nice to meet you." I was like, at the time, I was like, "I'm 29. Do you want to be on parish council? It's a 3-year term." Okay. And that was like, whoa, like we haven't even dated yet and we're getting married, so it's like, these generations, for better, for worse, they are not used to making long-term commitments. So if we're thinking about opportunities to get them deeper, you want to think about 3-month, 6-month max, maybe just one thing to help with, and then let that build. It's hard. It's hard. But we got to be patient. The other thing is you have to maybe have folks, including ourselves, step aside to make a space. Mm-hmm. And that's really hard to do. And I'm struggling with it in my own way, even at 44. It's like, I recognize that in order for me to allow somebody else to step up, I have to step back. Yeah. And that gets really, that's scary. It's threatening. It's like, I've poured my life into something, but it's just necessary. So I think what we heard is like, there's not even a space to break in. And again, that sometimes is because we're living longer, and those who are maybe retired have more time to give. So like, praise God, they want to give it to the church, but it's almost like these generations feel like they can't break in. Lastly, on the engaged side, every human being needs some sense of autonomy. That's what we call a nutriment of motivation, intrinsic motivation. They need to know that they can kind of figure it out the way they want to figure it out to a certain extent. And so we have to be careful about saying, okay, if we're going to give this millennial a leadership opportunity, they're going to do it in a different way. And it may work or it may not, but they've got to go through, again, that learning process of why it didn't work or why it did. And so I think those would be my points on the engaged side. And
then last but certainly not least, inspiring. How do we inspire?
I think we have to tell them, I think we have to remind them how that they are a pearl of great price, that the Lord is constantly looking for them, that we are constantly looking for them, and not in a way because they should be there, because we want them to be there.
Yes.
And I think that their life has purpose. Like, one of the reasons I'm here, and that is because at 21, I went on a retreat that CLI offered at the time for young adults, where I heard for the first time, even though I was baptized Catholic as a child, as a baby, grew up Catholic school, all that type of stuff. It was the first time in my life on that retreat that somebody said, God has a purpose for your life in particular, like just your life. He's thought he wants you to do something. And 21 was the first time I heard that. Mm. So if we're not messaging that all the way, right? Confirmation, I would say, I would blow up, your average confirmation prep program and just talk to kids about, who do you think God's calling you to be? Because he has something in mind for you. Like, that's the only message we got to get across to these generations so that they know to go on that path, right? So I think that is what will help them with their own vocation, whatever it is that God's called them to.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice. And I will say that people can find more information on the Catholic Leadership Institute via your website, which we'll put in the chat. And then also, maybe this is a little commercial for the Church in the 21st Century Center, but we're a catalyst and a resource for the church. And a lot of what we do is come up with new models. We see need and challenges and try to fill that with a resource. So I invite people to check out our programs for young adults, our Mass and Mingle, and also for our high school and college students, Agape Latte, young Catholic leaders for the kids that have just made their confirmation and are kind of trying to think, so what does this all mean? How do I live my faith? And lots of other things that we do at bc.edu/C21. Dan, always love having you. Appreciate you. Please know that we will send out this video. And then we also make the video a podcast. So you can listen to it for work or you can share it with others. And just blessings on your Lent and on your family and on your vocation and the work that you do. And know that we need you.
Right back to all of you. Thank you all for spending the time. It's been a real pleasure as always.
Yeah. Well, thank you to each and every one of you that were with us today. We need you too. The world needs you. Our church needs you. And we're so blessed that we have so many people that are so interested in growing our church and engaging our young people, because our church certainly needs young people. Anyway, happy Lent, Dan.
You too. Great being with you.
Appreciate you.